He was accused of theft at 18, with nowhere to go and a future that felt like a locked door. He hid in the rusted-out shell of his grandfather's old ambulance, and what he discovered welded behind an interior panel would change not just his life, but the story of his entire family. If you've ever felt trapped by a story someone else wrote for you, then stick around. This one's for you. And if it hits home, maybe subscribe, because we're building a community here for people who've had to find their own way out. The air in the release corridor of the county precinct tasted of stale coffee and industrial cleaner. It was a taste I'd come to associate with powerlessness. Every important moment of my life, from being placed in the system at age 7 to being aged out of it on my 18th birthday last week, have been seasoned with that same chemical tang. This time, however, there was a new flavor mixed in, the bitter, metallic taste of accusation. Sign here, Mr. Evans, the desk sergeant, slid a clipboard across the scuffed linoleum counter. He didn't look at me. His eyes were fixed on a crack in the ceiling, as if it were more interesting than the freshly minted adult criminal standing before him. I signed. My hand was shaking, the cheap ballpoint pen skittering across the paper. Leo Evans. It looked like a stranger's name. For the last 2 days, I'd been the suspect in the system. I was a case number. Now, I was just Leo, a name tethered to a felony charge. The sergeant grunted, took the clipboard, and slapped a thin manila envelope onto the counter. Your personals. Wallet, keys, phone. Battery's dead. He finally made eye contact, and his gaze was flat, bored. You have a court date in 2 weeks. Don't miss it. It wasn't a suggestion. It was a command disguised as advice. I scooped up the envelope. The key inside felt heavier than I remembered. It was a single, old-fashioned brass key, tarnished with age. It didn't belong to a group home or a locker. It belonged to my grandfather's property, a place I hadn't seen since I was 6, a year before he died, and my world fell apart. It was the only thing of his I had left. I stepped out of the precinct doors, and the midday sun hit me like a physical blow. The world felt too loud, too bright, too fast. Cars hissed by on the wet pavement from a morning shower. People bustled past, their faces set with purpose. They had places to go. I had nowhere. The group home had discharged me on my birthday. My part-time, under-the-table job at Croft Hardware was the source of the theft charge, so that was gone. I had $84 in my wallet and a court date that felt like a finish line I was being forced to run towards. My public defender, a tired-looking man named Mr. Davies with a coffee stain on his tie, had laid it out for me in the stark, windowless interview room. Look, Leo, he'd said, his voice a low monotone that suggested he'd given this speech 1,000 times. It's your word against Silas Crofts. He's a respected business owner. You're an 18-year-old kid with a file in the system. The prosecutor is offering a deal. Plead guilty to a misdemeanor. You get probation, community service, and restitution. You fight it, and they go for the felony grand larceny. If you lose, you're looking at jail time. A year, maybe 2-inch. But I didn't do it, I'd said, my voice sounding thin and childish even to me. He kept the cash from the register in a drawer under the counter. Anyone could have taken it. Davies had sighed, a long, weary exhalation. Did anyone else have access that afternoon? No, just me and him. He was in the back office. So, it's your word against his, he repeated, as if closing a loop. The deal is your best option. A misdemeanor is better than a felony. It'll make finding work harder, but not impossible. A felony, that's a different story. It closes a lot of doors. All my doors already felt closed. Now he was telling me to help the world lock them and throw away the key. The injustice of it was a hot coal on my stomach. Silas Croft had never liked me. He'd made that clear from the day I started, with his snide remarks about system kids and his constant watching, as if he expected me to pocket a handful of screws the second he turned his back. The job was just a way to save enough for a bus ticket out of town, a way to start fresh. Instead, it had become a trap. The $500 that went missing from the cash drawer might as well have been $1 million. It was enough to brand me. Standing on that sidewalk, with the precinct at my back and an empty future ahead, I felt a familiar wave of despair wash over me. It was the same feeling I'd had as a kid, watching my mom's car drive away for the last time. the world shrinking down to a single, unbearable point of abandonment. But this time, something else was mixed in with it. A flicker of anger. I didn't do it, and I wasn't going to sign a piece of paper saying I did. I pulled out the old brass key. It was cool against my palm. My grandfather, Thomas Evans. I barely remembered him. I had flashes of kind, weathered face, the smell of sawdust and coffee, and a deep, rumbling laugh. He was a paramedic, a man who fixed things, both people and machines. He died of a heart attack on a call, and with him went the only stability I'd ever known. My mom couldn't handle it, and a year later, she was gone. The property was 100 miles north, deep in the pine woods of the next county. I remember a small, dusty cabin and a big red barn. And inside the barn, his old ambulance. A retired, boxy machine he was always tinkering with. That key was for the cabin. It was the only home I could think of. I walked to the bus station, the city streets feeling alien and hostile. Every person who glanced my way felt like an accuser. I bought a one-way ticket with more than half of my money. As the bus pulled away from the station, I watched the city skyline recede, a jagged line of buildings that had never once felt like home. I was running, not from a law, but from the story they were trying to write for me. I didn't know what I was going to do. I just knew I couldn't stay there. The bus engine hummed, a monotonous drone that vibrated through the worn seat. I leaned my head against the cool glass of the window, and for the first time in 2 days, I slept. The journey was a slow bleed from gray concrete to deep, unending green. The further the bus traveled, the more the tension in my shoulders began to ease. The sprawling suburbs gave way to farmland, then to rolling hills thick with forests. The air that hissed from the vents above my seat started to smell less of exhaust and more of damp earth and pine. I was heading into a memory, a place that existed more in feeling than in clear images. I remembered the property as a kingdom. The cabin was the castle, the barn was the workshop of a great inventor, and the woods were a wild, untamed frontier. To a 6-year-old, it was everything. Now I wonder what I would find. A ruin? A collapsed roof and a field of weeds? The social worker who had given me the key after my 18th birthday review said the property taxes had been paid up for 20 years through an annuity my grandfather had set up. "He left it for you, Leo," she'd said, with a pitying look. "There's not much there, but it's yours." The bus driver called out my stop, Miller's Crossing, which was less a town and more a dusty crossroads with a gas station and a boarded-up diner. I was the only one who got off. The bus pulled away with a sigh of air brakes, leaving me in a profound silence, broken only by the chirping of crickets and the rustle of wind in the tall trees that lined the road. A faded wooden sign pointed down a gravel road. Evans Lane, my lane. The walk was 2 miles. The gravel crunched under my worn sneakers. The air was thick and humid, heavy with the scent of pine needles and decay. I felt a strange mix of dread and anticipation. This was the first time in my life I was walking toward something that belonged to me. Even if it was just a patch of dirt and a pile of rotting wood, it was mine. I saw the barn first. Its red paint had faded to a pale, peeling pink, and one of the big sliding doors hung crooked on its track. Beyond it, tucked into a grove of birch trees, was the cabin. It was small, made of dark logs, with a porch that sagged in the middle like a tired old man. The place wasn't a ruin, but it was close. Nature was patiently, persistently taking it back. Weeds choked the path, and a thick layer of moss grew on the north side of the roof. The brass key slid into the cabin's lock with a gritty protest. It took some jiggling, but finally, the tumbler turned with a solid clunk. I pushed the door open, and a wave of stale, musty air washed over me. The inside was a time capsule. A thick coat of dust covered everything, and cobwebs draped the furniture like ghostly shrouds. A simple wooden table and 2 chairs stood in the middle of the single room. A stone fireplace dominated one wall. In the corner was a small kitchenette, and a narrow bed was pushed against the far wall, a faded quilt still neatly folded on top. It was exactly as he'd left it. A coffee mug sat by the sink. A pair of worn work boots were by the door. It felt like he had just stepped out for a moment 12 years ago. I ran a hand over the dusty table, leaving a clean streak. This was his space. I was an intruder. I felt a lump form in my throat, a sudden, sharp pang of grief for the man I barely knew and the life I might have had. After a few minutes of just standing and breathing in the past, I turned my attention to the barn. The air inside was even thicker, smelling of hay, oil, and rust. Sunlight streamed through gaps in the siding, illuminating swirling dust motes. And there it was. In the center of the barn, sitting like a great, sleeping beast, was the ambulance. It was an old Ford E350, a boxy, late 80s model. The official paramedic markings were faded, the paint chipped and blistered with rust, especially around the wheel wells. The tires were flat, cracked, and sunken into the dirt floor. It looked ancient, a relic from another time. I walked around it, my hand trailing along its cold metal side. I remembered sitting in the driver's seat, my small hands barely able to get around the huge steering wheel, making siren noises while my grandfather worked on the engine. The side door groaned open on rusty hinges. The inside was stripped of most of its medical equipment, but the layout was still there. A bench along one side, cabinets on the other. A faint, lingering smell of antiseptic clung to the air, a ghost of 1,000 emergencies. I sat on the bench, the worn vinyl cool against my skin. Here, in this metal box, I felt strangely safe. The world, with its accusations and its locked doors, couldn't reach me. This was a place out of time. I spent the rest of the day in a daze, exploring my new, dilapidated kingdom. I found a hand pump for water outside, and after a few minutes of rusty, groaning effort, it produced a stream of clear, cold water. It tasted of iron and earth, the best thing I'd ever tasted. I found canned goods in the cabin's pantry, dusty but intact. Beans, soup, peaches. My grandfather had prepared for a long winter that never came. As dusk began to settle, casting long shadows through the trees, I found myself back in the ambulance. The light inside was dim, a soft gray. I ran my hand along the wall panels, a cheap, wood-grain laminate. And that's when I noticed it. On the panel behind the driver's seat, low to the floor, was a seam. It wasn't a factory seam. It was a thin, precise line of welding, painted over to match the fake wood grain, but the texture was different. It was too smooth, too perfect. And unlike the rest of the metal trim, which was pitted with rust, this weld was clean. My heart started to beat a little faster. Why would anyone weld a panel shut in an ambulance? I knelt, tracing the line with my finger. It formed a neat rectangle, about 2 feet long and a foot high. I knocked on it. The sound was a dull thud, but inside the panel, it was hollow. Curiosity gnawed at me. My grandfather was a tinkerer, a man who could fix anything. But this wasn't a repair. This was a concealment. It was deliberate. I thought about the theft charge, about the feeling of being trapped. And I looked at this hidden rectangle and saw, for the first time, not a problem to be solved, but a possible answer. A secret. Finding the tools was the next challenge. My grandfather, a man who lived by his hands, had to have a workshop. In the back of the barn, under a dusty tarp, I found it. A heavy wooden workbench, vices bolted to its edge, and a wall of pegboard holding a silhouette of tools long gone. But below the bench were several heavy metal toolboxes. Most were locked, the keys probably lost to time. But one, a large red chest, was unlatched. I lifted the lid. The smell of oil and metal filled the air. Inside, nestled in felt-lined trays, was a beautiful set of wrenches, sockets, and screwdrivers, each in its proper place. They were clean, cared for. This was his main set. And in the bottom compartment, I found what I was looking for, a small, handheld angle grinder with a metal cutting disc attached. Its power cord was coiled neatly beside it. There was no electricity in the barn, but I'd seen a gas-powered generator in the corner. It looked as ancient as everything else, but my grandfather had been a man who maintained his equipment. I checked the oil, found a can of old gasoline, and filled the tank. I pulled the cord once, twice, and on the third pull, the generator sputtered to life with a deafening roar, spewing a cloud of blue smoke. The lights I'd found strung along the rafters flickered on, casting a harsh, yellow glow over the scene. My hands were trembling as I carried the grinder back to the ambulance. This felt like a violation, a desecration. I was about to cut into his creation, his secret, but the desperation of my situation pushed me forward. I had 2 weeks until my court date. 2 weeks to find a miracle. Maybe this was it. I plugged in the grinder. The generator outside droned on, a mechanical heartbeat in the quiet woods. I put on a pair of dusty safety goggles I found on the workbench. I took a deep breath, braced myself, and pulled the trigger. The grinder screamed to life, a high-pitched shriek that echoed in the metal confines of the ambulance. I touched the spinning disc to the welded seam. A shower of bright orange sparks erupted, illuminating the dark interior. The smell of hot metal filled the air. It was slow going. The weld was thick, professional. My grandfather hadn't intended for this to be found easily. My arms started to ache, the vibration of the tool rattling my bones. I cut along the top seam, then the bottom. The noise was immense, a violent tearing sound that felt like it was splitting the past open. After what felt like an hour, I had cut through 3 sides of the rectangle. I switched off the grinder, and the sudden silence was deafening. My ears were ringing. The only sound was the chugging of the generator and my own ragged breathing. I found a crowbar in the toolbox and wedged the tip into the cut seam. I put my weight into it, and with a painful groan of protesting metal, the panel bent outwards. I pulled harder, and the last, uncut side gave way with a sharp tear. The panel swung open like a tiny door. I peered into the dark cavity behind it. It wasn't empty. Tucked deep inside, wrapped in what looked like an old oilcloth, was a metal box. It was a standard military-style ammo can, painted olive drab. My heart was hammering against my ribs. I reached in and pulled it out. It was heavy, much heavier than an empty can should be. I carried it over to the workbench and set it down under the bare bulb. The latch was stiff, but I managed to pry it open. The lid creaked upwards. I looked inside, and my breath caught in my chest. It was full of money, stacks of it, bundled in paper bands. 50s and 100s. I lifted one of the bundles. The bills were old, the soft, worn paper of currency that had been in circulation for a long time. I started pulling the stacks out, laying them on the workbench. There were dozens of them. It had to be tens of thousands of dollars. Maybe more. My first thought was pure, unadulterated shock. My grandfather, the quiet, hard-working paramedic, had a secret fortune hidden in an ambulance. Why? Where did it come from? It made no sense. My second thought was a jolt of raw, electric hope. This was it. This was my way out. With this much money, I could disappear. I could go anywhere, start a new life, leave Leo, Evans the accused thief, behind forever. I could hire a real lawyer, not an overworked public defender. I could fight. But beneath the money, there was something else. A large, yellowed envelope, sealed with wax, with a single word Leo written on it in my grandfather's spidery handwriting. And next to it, a small, portable cassette player, the kind people used in the 90s, with a single cassette tape inside. The tape was labeled with one word, listen. My hands were shaking again, but for a different reason now. This wasn't just a stash of cash. This was a message, a final word from a man I barely knew, reaching out to me from across the years. I pushed the money aside. The real secret wasn't the cash. It was in that envelope and on that tape. I picked up the cassette player. It felt impossibly light after the weight of the ammo can. The plastic was brittle with age. I pressed the play button. There was a click, a hiss of static, and then a voice. A voice I hadn't heard in 12 years, but recognized instantly. It was deep, calm, with a slight gravelly edge. It was my grandfather. Leo, the voice said, and the sound of my name spoken by him sent a shiver down my spine. If you're hearing this, then you've found my emergency fund, and it means you're in some kind of trouble. I'm sorry for that. I'm sorry I'm not there to help you myself. I set this aside for you, a nest egg, a fresh start. Whatever you need it for, it's yours. No questions asked. You can take it and run, son. Find a place where you can be happy, and don't look back. No one would blame you. There was a long pause, filled with the hiss of the tape. I could hear him take a slow, heavy breath. But if you're anything like me, he continued, his voice softer now, tinged with a sadness that felt ancient, running doesn't always sit right. Sometimes a man has to stand his ground. The money can help you do that, too. But before you decide what to do, you need to know where it came from. This money, it isn't clean. I didn't earn it. Not in the way a man should. It's the product of a mistake I made a long, long time ago. A mistake that has haunted me every day since. Another pause. I was holding my breath, my knuckles white as I gripped the small plastic player. There's a man in your town, or at least he was when I was still around. Robert Croft. His son, Silas, will be about my age now. Robert was a powerful man, owned half the businesses downtown. He was also a reckless one. One night, 25 years ago, I was the paramedic on the scene of a bad accident on the old highway. A head-on collision. A young couple in one car, both dead at the scene. In the other car, Robert Croft, drunk as a skunk, with barely a scratch on him. It was his fault. He'd crossed the center line. It should have been an open-end shut case. Vehicular manslaughter. My blood ran cold. Croft. Silas Croft was the one who had accused me. The name hit me like a physical blow. But he offered me money. My grandfather's voice was barely a whisper now, strained with shame. A lot of it. He said he had a family, a business, that it was one stupid mistake. He asked me to fudge my report, to say the other car had swerved, that I smelled no alcohol on him. I was young, your grandmother had just passed, and I was raising your mother on my own. We were struggling. I told myself I was doing it for her, for our future. So I took the money, and I lied. The tape hissed. I could hear a faint sound in the background, like he was rubbing his face with his hand. It was the worst thing I've ever done. Robert Croft walked away, and that young couple was buried. The lie ate at me, and it didn't stop there. Croft knew he owed me. He started paying me every month, a retainer, he called it. Hush money. For years. That's the money in this box, Leo. Every dirty dollar of it. I never spent a cent of it on myself. I put it away for you. I thought maybe, in your hands, it could be turned into something good. A fresh start that I never got. The truth is in the envelope, he said, his voice growing stronger, firmer. All of it. The original accident report I never filed, ledgers of his payments, even a signed confession I made him write out for me years later when my conscience wouldn't let me sleep anymore. I kept it as insurance. He died a few years back, but that legacy, that lie, it's still out there. His son Silas inherited his business, his money, and his arrogance. He doesn't know about this. To him, his father was a pillar of the community. The tape clicked off. The sudden silence in the barn was absolute. I sat there, stunned, the little cassette player still in my hand. The world had just tilted on its axis. This wasn't just about a theft charge anymore. This was about a lie that had spanned decades, a secret that connected my grandfather, the man who had accused me, and me, in a tangled, ugly web. The money on the workbench no longer looked like a blessing. It felt heavy, cursed. Every bill was tainted with my grandfather's shame and the blood of two innocent people. He had given me a choice. Take the money and run, perpetuating the silence, using the fruits of the lie to save myself, or use the truth to fight back, not just for me, but for him, to clear his name by admitting his guilt, and in doing so, clear my own. I sat on that dusty bench for hours as the generator hummed outside, my mind reeling. I felt a storm of emotions. Anger at my grandfather for his weakness, pity for his long years of guilt, and a profound, aching sadness for the life he'd lived, burdened by this secret. But underneath it all, I felt a strange sense of clarity. My whole life, I had been a victim of circumstances. A kid passed around by the system, a suspect defined by a false accusation. I was a story written by other people. My grandfather's confession, his terrible mistake, had given me something I'd never had before, a choice. The power to write my own ending. Running was tempting. The thought of a new town, a new name, a life free from the shadow of the system, was a powerful lure. It was the easy path, but I thought of Silas Croft, his smug face, his easy assumption of my guilt. He was living a life built on a lie that had cost people their lives and my grandfather his soul. And now he was trying to destroy my life over a few $100s. The injustice of it all burned in me. I thought about Mr. Davies and his tired, cynical advice to take the plea deal. He saw me as just another file, another lost cause. Everyone did. Maybe it was time to show them they were wrong. I finally stood up, my legs stiff. I walked over to the workbench and picked up the yellowed envelope. Elio, it felt like a summons. I broke the wax seal. Inside were the documents he'd described. The original, handwritten accident report detailing Robert Croft's intoxication and fault. Pages from a ledger book with dates and amounts listed in my grandfather's neat script. And a single sheet of paper, a sworn statement signed by Robert Croft, admitting to the bribery and the cover-up dated 10 years after the accident. My grandfather had forced him to write his own indictment. This was more than just evidence. It was a bomb. It would not only clear me, but it would destroy the Croft family's reputation, their legacy, everything they had built. It was a terrible, powerful weapon, and my grandfather had put it in my hands. I made my decision. I wasn't going to run. I was going to fight. I carefully put all the documents back in the envelope. I took one stack of the $100 bills from the ammo can, enough to live on for a few weeks, and to hire a real lawyer if I needed one. I left the rest in the box. It wasn't my money to run away with. It was evidence. It was restitution. The next morning, I walked the 2 miles back to Miller's Crossing. I used the payphone at the gas station. I called the number on the card Mr. Davies had given me. His secretary answered. "I need to speak with Mr. Davies," I said, my voice steadier than I expected. "It's about the Leo Evans case. Tell him I have new evidence. Tell him it changes everything. There's a moment, I think, in everyone's life where you have to decide who you are. Not who people say you are, or who the system has labeled you as, but who you choose to be. For me, that moment came in a dusty barn with a dead man's confession in my hand. And I have to ask you, have you ever had a moment like that? A choice that defined you? If you feel comfortable, share in the comments. Your story matters. Reading them, I've learned that we're all fighting some kind of battle, and knowing that, well, it helps. It really does. Now, let's get back to what happened next. Mr. Davies agreed to see me the following day. I took the bus back to the city. This time, the ride felt different. I wasn't running away. I was heading into a fight. The city skyline didn't look menacing anymore. It looked like a challenge. His office was in a run-down building downtown, with peeling paint and a wheezing elevator. It was exactly what you'd expect for a public defender. I sat in the waiting room, the envelope heavy on my lap. When he finally called me in, he had that same tired, resigned look on his face. "Leo," he said, gesturing to the chair in front of his cluttered desk. "My secretary said you have new evidence. What is it? A witness? An alibi?" He sounded like he was just going through the motions, expecting nothing. I didn't say anything. I just slid the envelope across the desk. He picked it up, raised an eyebrow at the broken wax seal, and pulled out the contents. He started with the old accident report. His eyes scanned the page, his expression neutral. Then he picked up the ledger sheets. His brow furrowed slightly. He spent a long time looking at them. Finally, he picked up the signed confession from Robert Croft. As he read it, I watched the change happen. It was like watching a slow sunrise. The weariness in his eyes burned away, replaced by a sharp, focused intensity. The slump in his shoulders straightened. He read the confession twice, his lips moving slightly. He put the paper down on his desk, very carefully, as if it were fragile glass. He looked up at me, and for the first time, he really saw me. He didn't see a case file or a system kit. He saw a person holding a stick of dynamite. "Where did you get this?" he asked, his voice a low, hushed whisper. "My grandfather left it for me," I said. He was the paramedic on the scene. Davies leaned back in his chair, which squeaked in protest. He stared at the papers, then at me, then back at the papers. He let out a long, slow whistle. "Jesus Christ, kid," he breathed. He wasn't a public defender anymore. He was a lawyer who had just been handed the case of a lifetime. "Silas Croft is accusing you of stealing $500, he said, almost to himself. "And you're holding evidence that his entire family fortune and reputation are built on bribery and a cover-up that led to 2 people's deaths going unpunished." He shook his head in disbelief. This isn't just evidence. This is biblical. He leaned forward, his eyes alight. Okay, Leo, here's what we're going to do. We are not going to the police with this. Not yet. This is too big, too old. The statute of limitations on the bribery is long past. But the power this gives us right now, it's absolute. He tapped the confession with his finger. We are going to request a meeting with Silas Croft and his lawyer. We are going to present this to them, and we're going to watch them fold. The meeting was set for 2 days later in a sterile conference room at a fancy law firm downtown. It was a world away from Mr. Davies's shabby office. The table was polished mahogany, the chairs were supple leather, and the water was served in chilled glass pitchers. Silas Croft sat across from me, a smug, confident smirk on his face. He looked relaxed, like a man who was there to swat away a minor annoyance. His lawyer was older, with silver hair and an expensive suit, the picture of corporate power. Mr. Davies started the meeting. We're here to discuss the baseless charges brought against my client, Mr. Evans, he said, his voice calm and professional. Croft's lawyer chuckled. Baseless? Your client was the only one with access to the cash drawer. We have him on camera in the store. This is an open-end shut case. We're here to discuss the terms of the restitution. Mr. Davies smiled, a thin, cold smile. I don't think so. We're not here to talk about $500. We're here to talk about this. He slid a folder across the polished table. Not the original documents, but high-quality copies. Croft's lawyer opened the folder. Silas Croft leaned over his shoulder to look. I watched their faces. It was even better than I had imagined. The lawyer's professional composure vanished, replaced by a slack-jawed shock. Silas Croft's face went from smug to confused, then to pale, horrified disbelief as he read his father's words. The color drained from his face. He looked like he'd been punched in the gut. What is this? He stammered, looking at his lawyer, then at me. This is a joke. It's a forgery. Is it? Mr. Davies said softly. We have the original documents, of course. Handwriting experts can verify the signatures. The ledger entries correspond to withdrawals from your father's bank accounts, which I'm sure a forensic accountant would be very interested to look at. And then there's the matter of the 2 people who died in that accident, whose families were told it was their own fault. I imagine the local news would be very interested in that story. The story of how Croft Hardware was saved by a bribe that covered up a vehicular manslaughter. The room was silent. The only sound was the faint hum of the air conditioning. Silas Croft stared at the papers, his hands trembling. The arrogant, powerful man I had seen in the hardware store was gone. In his place was a scared, cornered man, watching his world crumble. His lawyer cleared his throat, his composure returning, but his face was still pale. What do you want? He asked, his voice tight. First, Mr. Davies said, his voice like ice. The charges against my client will be dropped. Immediately. You will call the district attorney's office before we leave this room and tell them you made a mistake, that the money was found, that it was a simple accounting error. The lawyer nodded. Second, Davies continued, my client has suffered undue stress, defamation of character, and loss of employment. He will require compensation for his troubles. Let's say $50,000. Croft's lawyer started to protest, but Davies cut him off. That's a very small price to pay for this to remain a private matter. Think of it as a contribution to his future, to make up for the one you try to take away from him. Silas Croft didn't even look at his lawyer. He just nodded, his eyes wide and vacant. Fine, he whispered. Whatever. Just make it go away. Oh, it's not going away, I said, speaking for the first time. My voice was quiet, but it cut through the silence. Both Croft and his lawyer looked at me. The money my grandfather took from your father, it's still there. I'm giving it to the families of the couple who died. Anonymously. And you're going to match it. Croft stared at me, his mouth opening and closing silently. His lawyer looked at Davies, who just shrugged, a flicker of a proud smile on his face. That's the deal, I said. You drop the charges, you pay for your mistake, and you help make right the one your father made. Or this all becomes public. There was no negotiation. They agreed to everything. We walked out of that conference room, and I felt 10 feet tall. Mr. Davies clapped me on the shoulder, a genuine, hearty gesture. Leo, he said, a look of real respect in his eyes. You did good, kid. You did more than good. The charges were dropped that afternoon. The settlement money was wired to an account Davies helped me set up the next day. But I didn't feel like celebrating. The victory felt hollow, heavy. I had won, but the truth was still a secret, buried again for the sake of convenience. I took the bus back to my grandfather's property. When I stepped onto the land this time, it felt different. It wasn't a refuge or a hiding place anymore. It was home. I walked into the barn and stood before the old ambulance. I had found a fortune inside it, but the real treasure was the choice it had given me. The chance to fight back, to define myself. I spent the next few weeks in a quiet solitude. I used some of the settlement money to buy a used truck, tools, and supplies. I started working on the cabin. I repaired the sagging porch, replaced the broken windows, and patched the roof. I cleared the weeds and planted a small garden. With every swing of the hammer, every shovelful of dirt, I felt like I was not just rebuilding a house, but rebuilding myself. Mr. Davies helped me track down the descendants of the couple who had died in the crash. They were grandchildren living in another state. We set up a trust, and I deposited all the money from the ammo can along with the matching fund from Croft. I sent it with a simple, anonymous note from someone who believes old wrongs should be made right. I never heard from them, and I didn't need to. It was enough to know the money had finally gone where it was supposed to. I thought a lot about my grandfather during that time. He wasn't the simple hero I had imagined as a child. He was a flawed man. He had made a terrible mistake, born of fear and desperation. But he had also spent the rest of his life trying to atone for it. He saved the money, documented the truth, and in the end, he left the final choice, the final act of redemption, to me. He had trusted me to do the right thing. It was the greatest inheritance he could have possibly left me. The ambulance still sits in the barn. I cleaned it up, aired it out, but I left the cut panel on the side open like a small, square window into the past. Sometimes I sit inside it and think about the journey that brought me here. From a powerless kid in the system to a falsely accused teenager, to the owner of this small piece of the world. I learned that home isn't just a place you're given. Sometimes it's a place you have to build yourself out of the broken pieces of the past. And freedom isn't about running away from your story. It's about taking control of it and writing an ending that you can be proud of. My life isn't perfect now. I still have scars. I'm still figuring things out. But for the first time, my future feels like an open road, not a locked door. And every morning, I wake up in the cabin my grandfather built. I breathe in the clean, pine-scented air, and I feel a sense of peace that no amount of money could ever buy. I'm home. This whole experience taught me that inheritance isn't always about money or property. Sometimes, the most important things we're left with are the stories, the secrets, and the choices of those who came before us. It's up to us to decide what to do with them, to break the cycles or to repeat them. And that's the question I want to leave you with. What have you inherited? Not just the good stuff, but the complicated stuff, the burdens? And how have you tried to turn it into something better? Sharing these things, I think it helps us all feel a little less alone in our struggles. So if you feel moved to, please share in the comments. And if you want to be part of a community that believes in second chances and the power of rewriting your own story, hit that subscribe button. Thank you for listening. Truly.
Large luggage carrier, cart, and 2 wooden crates. I'm sure we can do that. Vibes are always so good over here. I'm playing Pocket Frogs right now. That's awesome. W Vibes in here. I'm fantastic. Aw, thanks so much, Manuel. Hope you're having a great day. Also, thanks for the likes, Ty. What games you running today? So usually I played more chill games at night, Emmanuel. So we're just doing Pokopia right now. Tomorrow night, Stardew Valley. We're doing like an expanded run with all of the content mods. And sometimes I do midday streams. I've kind of had to take a break on those at the moment because work's been really busy for me. But the day streams are really kind of like a lot of different games. Hi. Oh my god, you have a very relaxing voice. Very nice. Thanks, Runes of Arcadia. Appreciate it. Thanks for hopping in. Okay, let's swing by. Let's swing by the Skylands. See if there's anything good over there. Do you have a Discord spot to chill in? Yeah, Manuel, we do have a Discord. Here, let me do this. I think that's the command. There you go. Oh, thanks for the follow, Runes of Arcadia. Appreciate it. Okay, harvest veggies is complete. Perfect. I don't think anything special is over here. No, we're good. Okay. Pokemon. What's your favorite Pokemon? So, I say this a lot, Runes, but I do like Pikachu, even though I know that's basic. But my number 2 favorite Pokemon is, well, kind of tied for first, is Delivered. What about you? You have like a 3-foot Pikachu pillow? Oh god, Ash. That's amazing. I love Ninetales. Oh, that's awesome, Runes of Arcadia. I think, so there's this habitat in this game right now I haven't built yet, which I probably should. Where is it? Now that you mentioned Ninetales, you have to get 9 flames. Thinking that that might be Ninetales.